written very soon thereafter by someone who really was imbued with the Spirit of John. There is no extant copy of the Gospel of John that doesn't have the 21st chapter on it. So we know that this has been part and parcel of it ever since the beginning. So what does this chapter, why would somebody do that? Why would we have this additional chapter? Well, we have it because of Peter and because of John and their role in the life of the early church. The appearance itself is very similar to other appearances that Jesus makes. He calls them out. He does a miracle by the multiplication of the fish, and then he shares a meal with them, and then he commissions them. And it's similar in that way to the other resurrection appearances. But what's different is Peter and John. And what's happened is that by this point, it's clear that something has happened to Peter. That he was a strong leader in the original community, but that he has been taken off bound and put to death. So he has died. It seems also that John has died, because the question seems to be posed to Jesus. Hey, we thought John was supposed to stay alive, John, the beloved disciple, until Christ's return. And Jesus in this exchange says, no, that's not what I meant. Don't worry about that. So it seems that these two crucial leaders of these early communities have both died. And this chapter is intended, on the one hand, to empower Peter's community again. Because you remember, just before this, the last thing Peter has done is to betray Jesus 3 times. And this, in a sense, by affirming Jesus 3 times, sort of redeems Peter in the gospel itself. And without demeaning the other disciples. And both John and Peter have then taken on this larger role and have launched the Christian communities as we know them. So, why should we care? Well, because this chapter represents for us the next step. That is, it's the end of the season of appearances. And now the church has to decide what it's going to do about those appearances. How are we going to make sense out of them? Who are we going to be? How are we going to organize ourselves? And in the coming weeks, the next few weeks of the Easter season, we'll go back and we'll hear, next week, the Good Shepherd story. We'll hear some of Jesus' teachings rethought through by the disciples in light of the resurrection. Because now they can go back and they can revisit all of Jesus' teachings with the light of the resurrection shining through those teachings. And the important thing about this chapter is that it conveys that sense that the continuing act of the acts of God, the resurrection of Christ, is an ongoing matter. That Christ appears at breakfast again and again. That Christ works in the lives of really the strangest people. We hear today the story of Paul's conversion. Now, he was a persecutor of the early Christians. We hear about Peter today. He was an idiot, but he was a disciple. And then we hear of John, who was beloved all the way from the beginning. 3 very different characters. And they are the 3 on whom the early church is built around. And it opens to us the possibility of God working through our own lives. Whether we are the beloved disciple, or the betrayer, or the persecutor. It's the sense that God's revelation is forever ongoing, that it's as fresh in the 21st century as it was in the first century, that we are to be as overwhelmed by the presence of Christ in our own day, by his sending us in our own day, as were those early disciples. No matter who we are, no matter where we've been, no matter what side of things we've stood, Christ comes to us and feeds us and sends us. And from John's point of view, that's the way it will always be. Amen.